All right, everyone. It is straight up 2 o'clock. We have a lengthy session ahead of us, so let's get the show started here. I'll have a little bit of an introduction before I introduce our esteemed panelists for today. But good afternoon. I'm Steve Belko. I am the Executive Director of Missouri Humanities. And if you attended some of our morning sessions, phenomenal sessions, well, welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time, well, welcome to Missouri Humanities Symposium, The Future of Work. Every spring, Missouri Humanities hosts a regional symposium in Springfield in partnership with the Humanities and Ethics Center at Drury University. Our recurring theme is always humanities and the future. And previous symposiums addressed a range of challenging subjects surrounding this larger approach, such as the future course of democracy in a pluralistic society, environmental humanities, and our very first one on bioethics and medical technology. So today we have convened students, scholars, and community leaders in a virtual format to explore how work shapes our shared human experience. So through a series of interdisciplinary panels and presentations all day long and into this evening, participants and attendees have and will examine workforce development practices and trends that impact how, where, and why we work as we do. And the full schedule is available on our website at mohumanities.org/future of work. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to enrich lives and strengthen communities by connecting Missourians to the people, places, and ideas that shape our society. And the best way to sustain our mission is to join it, become a member of Missouri Humanities. There are various levels of support and benefits, including free books, discounted tickets to special programs, access to members-only events. Just go to our website, mohumanities.org, click on memberships under the donate tab, and join our movement. We are also live streaming today's program by way of Facebook. The format will be about 40 minutes of panel discussion facilitated by me, followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A at the end of the session. So if you're joining us by Zoom, the Q&A feature is at the top of your screen. Feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A feature at any time, but we will not get to them until the end of our panel. Tomorrow, you will receive a link to the post-event survey in your email inbox. Please fill this out. It's a very important program evaluation tool for us. It takes less than 5 minutes to complete and really helps Missouri Humanities gauge our future events. So this is the fifth panel of the day and features prominent state leaders who will discuss workforce and economic development issues and initiatives in Missouri. And it is now my honor to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. And bear with me here because I'm going to read their bios, and there's more than one. So let me move through this. I'll start with Rob Dixon. He's director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development. Before becoming director, Rob served as the president and CEO of the Missouri Community College Association. It's a membership organization for Missouri's community colleges, which provides government advocacy, networking, education resources for all of its members. And I believe it is the largest higher education association in the state with approximately 2,000 members. So Rob also served in a variety of roles at the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce. His overall responsibilities included leadership and management of staff and programs and economic and workforce development, public affairs, local government policy, communications, community development, and strategic planning. Busy. Rob also served as the executive director of the Hollister Area Chamber of Commerce. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps after high school, where he served as an intelligence analyst in Afghanistan and in Pakistan immediately after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He received an honorable discharge as a sergeant after 5 years in the Marine Corps. Rob has a master's of public administration degree from Missouri State, a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and an Associate of Arts in Political Science from St. Charles Community College, which is right around the corner from where I am right now, where I live. Dr. Kimberly Beatty began her tenure as Metropolitan Community College's 8th chancellor in July of 2017. She came to MCC from Houston Community College, which I believe is about the nation's 4th largest community college system, where she served as Vice Chancellor for Instructional Services and Chief Academic Officer. She is an ardent champion of access and equity and is devoted to the community college mission of providing access to higher education for all. Dr. Beatty is equally committed to workforce development in Kansas City. And she prioritizes building relationships with business and industry leaders in that community to ensure that the college is offering educational opportunities that will lead to the credentials that students need to start their careers. She has 3 degrees, all from the same place, Morgan State University. If you don't know where that is, it's in Baltimore. A BA in English, an MA in English, and an EDD in higher education with a specialization in community college leadership. She has brought to MCC 28 years of teaching and administrative experience in higher education, including 21 years of very progressive leadership experience at community colleges in California, Virginia, and in Texas. And she's also served as a tenured associate professor in English. So as a former tenured professor in history, we would have shared practically the same hallway. So I love it. Brian Crouse, he is the Vice President of Education for the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He is responsible for developing education policy, programs, and initiatives that bridge the gap between the business and education communities. He is directly responsible for a portfolio of education workforce development programs that include Dream It, Do It, Missouri, Show Me Careers, Missouri Mathematics and Science Coalition. That just scares me reading that, and other initiatives. But in addition, Brian oversees a newly launched effort, Missouri Chamber Manufacturing Alliance, which is to unite and enhance Missouri's manufacturing sector. Before taking the position as VP for Education of the Missouri Chamber back in 2012, Brian worked at the Missouri Department of Higher Education in the Academic Affairs Division as a liaison to numerous statewide organizations and agencies. And prior to that, he worked for Westminster College in Fulton for 6 years as Regional Director of Enrollment Management, where he recruited domestic and international students. Beautiful campus. Prior to making a career change to higher education in 2002, Brian worked for 12 years in retail management for a variety of large box and specialty retail stores. And during this time, he worked on the front lines of employee training and witnessed firsthand the growing divide of worker preparedness and skill gaps, the job profiles. He distinctly understands the needs of today's employers in an ever-changing knowledge-based economy. Lastly, but definitely not least, Steve Devlin. He is the Senior Director of MU Extension Business and Community Development Program. He's also Associate Dean of Economic Development and Industrial Engagement in the MU College of Engineering, where he heads up a $10.4 million statewide program that will include the Missouri Small Business and Technology Development Centers, Missouri Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, Economic Development Administration Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, Environmental Assistance Center, and of course the Workforce Development Program. And before joining the B&C in early 2013, Steve played a variety of leadership roles at Iowa State University's Center for Industrial Research and Service, including the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. He is our second distinguished individual from Iowa State University today, so it must be something about our neighbor far up north. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Science from Truman State out of Kirksville, a Master's of Science and a Doctorate in Agricultural and Industrial Technology from Iowa State University. He is an Army veteran and former member of both the Missouri and Iowa Army National Guard. And his research interests include biopolymers, biocomposites, bio-based products industry, and rapid prototyping, none of which I have any idea about, but maybe we get to learn more about it. So everybody welcome. I've got a whole host of questions that my Deputy Director, Ashley, has compiled. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of pick you out by name. That way we can move through here quickly. So everybody can hear me, correct? I hope so. All right. I'm going to throw this out to all of you, and I'll just start in the order that I went through. I have Rob at the top. How will the COVID pandemic permanently change the way we work? Rob, you're first up.
Wow, that's a heck of a question to start off with. I don't think it's just about the way that we work. I mean, I think everything about this pandemic will disrupt and change. Frankly, there may be some positive changes, but whether they're positive or negative, there will be changes to just about every aspect, I think, of society, whether that's economically or socially, education, certainly. even in our own kind of family and friend relationships. And so I think all of that is still very much as we go, it's all kind of, we're kind of understanding the impact as it goes. From an economic perspective, we've seen significant disruptions in consumer behavior, for that matter. So people obviously have, especially a year ago at this time, they were not going out to stores. Many stores were closed, shopping online and those kind of things. So that changed a lot of what the needs of workers were. Obviously, especially a year ago in the early days of the pandemic, we know that many workers, the actual way of doing business changed, went from interacting directly with customers to just little things, just from, if you think about what it takes to train somebody to run, for example, a cash register, a point of sale type of a thing, and all of a sudden that goes away, and now you've got to disrupt that, and you've got to implement technologies that many of these businesses, especially small businesses, did not have at the time. Just little things like getting groceries out to stores and getting them, out on the street and onto the curb for curbside things. All of those things happened so rapidly that those are just some very minor examples of it. On the kind of the real estate market, we've seen significant changes, as you can imagine, in office types of settings and things like that. And so all of these things we know are going to change the way that businesses operate. I think at a very fundamental level, it proved the model. It proved the model that many organizations, I guess, thought about before, which was that, sure, you could telework, you could try to implement some flexible schedules and things like that. But it proved the model that it actually does work. You can see the number of jobs that we have back in our economy and the recovery that we've seen. The economy itself right now is incredibly strong and is continuing to do so. And I think it's just a testament of the resilience and the changing nature of it. So long term, we're going to rely on education and our colleges and universities to keep up with these changes, because I think we are just at the very tip end of this and kind of figuring out what it looks like.
Thank you. Steve, you want to take a crack at it?
So I totally agree with what Rob is saying in that conversation. I mean, we've seen change over the years. I think one distinct thing that I think has come out of this this challenge is it's caused people to consider different options. We know that work has always been changing. It's just now there's more of an emphasis for folks to accept that change. And I think that's going to accelerate the way that we see our workplaces modifying how they approach things, flex time, alternative schedules, the opportunity for working from home, as well as hybrid kinds of models. I think it's opening up that door. And ultimately, I think I heard Rob also mention there, a lot of this is driven by the consumer, right? As we change what we're buying, what we expect, what our issues are, then businesses and organizations have to change how they respond to those issues or those problems. And so I think, if anything, I think it's going to help us diversify and create more responsive types of organizations that will drive, the state's economy and at the same time be providing jobs for Missouri citizens.
I'm going to turn now to Dr. Beatty, and I am pronouncing that correct, am I?
You are. You did an excellent job.
I got it.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and participate in this panel with my esteemed colleagues. Rob, it's very good to see you. Yeah, the pandemic permanently changed the way we do our work in terms of how we serve students, and a lot of the ways that a lot of the things that were mentioned in terms of what we thought might work, but it really pushed us and stretched us to say, okay, now you have no choice. So you have to make these things work. We're seeing it across sectors, but for us specifically, the way we serve students in terms of remote advising, or even the way they register or go through the enrollment funnel, is different. Obviously, the way that we're delivering instruction, more of the, not just being virtual on the screen, but the, what is it when you're using the, you know what I'm saying, when you use the
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality, thank you. the virtual reality with the labs. I mean, I can remember the days when I was a faculty member, dean, or other type of campus leader, where I had oversight over faculty, direct oversight. And you talk about doing virtual reality in their lab instead of, I can remember talking in Virginia with faculty about doing biology labs differently, and they just wouldn't have it. And now we do see it works. It's not optimal, but there is, what we're learning is that there is a place for some of that, but it doesn't replace the hands-on. I mean, because if somebody's going to stick a needle in your arm, you want to make sure that they've stuck a needle in somebody's arm before and done it successfully. Or if somebody's going to weld, which is a good example of something that can be done through virtual reality, that they've done that, actually done that. So we've seen where there is a place for it, but there's also a time for it. We don't want to replace anything, but I think there is a place for it. It has changed how we do things. I think there's some good, a lot of good, you know, obviously it's unfortunate the lives that have been lost as a result of the pandemic, but there's a lot of good operationally that has caused us to be more efficient and think outside of the box in terms of how we do things and do it better.
Yeah, just as a footnote, I had intended to take Missouri Humanities virtual and digital a couple months before everything hit. We just expedited it, and now we can have excuses on how to perfect it. But Brian, why don't you add, please, to that, how the COVID pandemic has permanently changed the way we work?
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here in front of everybody and with the panel that we're assembled with. You know, we're seeing, you know, it's accelerated everything. Steve kind of alluded to it. Businesses that have been agile and adapted have brought in digital platforms, have looked at their business model, and have you know, made those corrections along the way in real time. They're accelerating in the pandemic and out of the pandemic. Their margins are increasing. We're also seeing companies that haven't figured out the digital agility and what remote work and virtual learning and life is like. They're kind of struggling. Profit margins are narrowing. They're having some challenges. You know, we look at consumer behaviors, and I have to pull this up because this is the Chick-fil-A app. So, and I want to say Chick-fil-A here, not because I'm being sponsored by them or that they give me any kickback. But if you remember when COVID hit, if all the retail fast food were trying to figure this out, how to deal with the COVID, how to be safe and secure and still deliver their product. And Chick-fil-A did it. I mean, they put in practices, they put in apps, they put in different types of safety mechanisms. When you drive up to the drive-through, you feel very secure and safe in getting your food. I mean, that type of procedure that was put in place at Chick-fil-A is also seen in other stores, in other retail establishments, in other manufacturing firms to mitigate that. But you'll see as we go out of COVID, people are going to still recognize the value that those places had on their lives, and they're going to be more loyal to them. And the companies that really didn't care or didn't take those active steps, you're going to see challenges with them. The other thing that I think we need to hit on is there's a great report out by Microsoft now called The Next Great Disruption, and it really talks about COVID and how it's changed remote work. And they say basically that 70% of workers want to work in a remote or flexible space environment going forward. I know I do a little bit more deep work when I'm off, you know, on my own, kind of buttoned up in my office at home, and I don't have any distractions. And a lot of people feel that way. And, you know, that I think is the nature of what we're going to see going forward is a flexibility for workers and how they meet the demands of the workplace. The challenges are on the employers, on the CEOs, to how to deal with that change, how to embrace that change, because talent has been proven now, it's everywhere. So I could be in Seattle and find a wonderful job in St. Louis working for an IT company like Worldwide Tech. I don't have to leave my home, but I can have a great job in St. Louis, and vice versa. Folks in St. Louis can work for an IT company in Palo Alto and not leave their home. So,
well, from our perspective, I know if it has to do with anything, a reduction of travel, which I don't do anymore. The petroleum industry might be a little perturbed, or automobile, but I kind of like the virtual world. It's kind of nice, even though I still like the in-person. I'm going to start picking on some of you here now. And so I'm going to go to Director Dixon here. How has the DED supported Missouri throughout this pandemic, and how are we doing in our recovery?
Yeah, the pandemic itself, I mean, I'm struggling to not use the word unprecedented, but there's really no other way to explain what has happened over the last year other than to say unprecedented. And I'm sorry for hitting that cliche. But aside from the public health impact, which is tremendous and obvious, there were 345,000 Missourians that basically lost their jobs overnight at about a year ago. In that end of March, beginning of April timeframe when the pandemic hit, just before it, we were at nearly record high levels of people working in Missouri. Over 3 million people, or just about 3 million people, were working. The pandemic hit, 345,000 lost their jobs overnight, and unemployment rates skyrocketed. It obviously happened like that across the country. But at this time a year ago, most of us that were working in economic and workforce development didn't know where the bottom was going to be. And we didn't know how far we were going to fall. We didn't know where things were going to land. And things started to stabilize a bit in late spring and early summer. And we are so fortunate, I think, in Missouri, the way that the economy has recovered here. We're actually leading the country in the top tier of states for jobs that have come back. Almost 70% of those jobs that we lost a year ago, have come back. That is not the case around the country. You mentioned the tourism economy. That's actually one of the areas that is still really one of the areas that's still hardest hit and coming back a little bit more slowly, although we've seen that in recent weeks start to really rebound as vaccines have become more widespread and case counts were going down, especially a month or so ago, folks were getting more confident. But Missouri's economy is really strong right now. We've got one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. It just was released today, about 4%, 4.2%. And so incredibly positive signs ahead of us. As we look at, economic activity, we manage expansion and attraction projects. We call them projects, but they're companies that are looking at, moving to our state or expanding in our state. And our pipeline, so to speak, is as full as it's ever been. In many cases, it's actually increased from where it was last year. The mix is a little bit different from last year. We've seen a really strong increase in logistics and distribution, as you might expect, to support the rapid shift to online. In fact, the governor has talked quite a bit about this, but we've seen large expansions in Amazon distribution centers, fulfillment centers. Chewy, national pet food retailer, put a huge distribution center up in the Kansas City area very recently. And all of these things are actually starting. They were initiated since the pandemic hit. They weren't kind of projects that were working before, but all of them came online. Manufacturing is looking really strong in Missouri right now, and we're really fortunate about that. There's some areas of concern, certainly across the board, and there are some challenging implications for those citizens who have not yet gotten their employment back. But the positive thing from my perspective is that there certainly is opportunities ahead. I'm really proud of the work that our team did. We were really involved in the pandemic response and recovery efforts. Governor asked the entire administration and every cabinet agency to participate in that. Our team worked very closely with many of the organizations and partners that are on the call today to do things like small business grants and nonprofit organization grants, trying to really utilize all of those federal resources that came in. But we had team members that were helping companies retool to PPE production that, were making, other types of products before. We had folks that were helping employers recruit employees because actually the skills gap and the labor shortages that we were seeing before the pandemic were also at play during the pandemic, even though folks, did have to close and some things like that. So we had teams that were working to help recruit. I mean, just a really dynamic phase, I think. And from, all of the economic development community across the state, not just DED, but certainly our local partners as well. We were called upon to do things that many of us in economic development really never thought that we would do. But we went through a pretty significant reorganization and change a few years ago that I think left us in a more dynamic and agile mode, which is where we needed to be. And the bottom line was we were able to connect better with employers across the state and rapidly respond to them. And the folks on the call here or on the panel were right there on the front lines with us in many different ways. And it's just, I think when we look back in this period in our careers professionally, but also in the history of it from all of our organizations, we're going to be really proud of the fact that we were here doing the work that we did during this really challenging and unprecedented time.
Just as a sidebar here, one of our major objectives at Missouri Humanities is to conduct programs and projects that help promote cultural heritage tourism throughout the state. That's one of our primary focuses and is part of our new strategic plan. So economic development or revitalization is part of the humanities, and that's kind of the reason why we're discussing workforce development, the future of work in this manner. For those who may not know, as of about 2 years ago, 2019, Missouri Humanities was moved from the Department of Economic Development to underneath the Lieutenant Governor. So we have a direct role and importance that comes with tourism and economic development in a variety of ways, including educational. And that's what I want to touch next. I'm going to pick on the doctors here. I'll start with Dr. Beatty and then turn to Dr. Devlin here. What kind of role can education play? How are schools preparing for the future? What would be some of the major differences and circumstances or thought processes for young people today than was experienced by our generations? And I'll start with Dr. Beatty.
Well, that virtual learning and virtual reality piece is the key thing. I mean, we see it across sectors in health industries where they do now these telehealth. And I was speaking with my doctor about it and said, did you ever imagine? But we have to align our methodologies with the ever-changing technology, biomanufacturing, and especially now with the vaccine. That's an area where there certainly could be a lot more depth and scope, given the challenges that we saw in getting these things going. So the technology in the classroom is the key thing, because not only did are the schools changing, but the jobs changed and how they do work, whether that's manufacturing, healthcare. Those are the two big ones that have changed, and that technology is what we have to keep pace with. So that is how we will continue to prepare the workforce to just keep and make sure that they're relevant, in the moment, and that they are relevant and where our curriculum is aligned and our pedagogy and equipment, which is the big deal for us, making sure that it's aligned with what's actually happening in the field. And the challenge that we will have, I know pivot has become the big word this past year, but just like we pivoted, so did so many of the businesses. And now we'll have that, double pivot, for lack of a better phrase, to keep pace with them and prepare them for those jobs of the future.
Oh, great. Dr. Devlin, your turn.
So I thought those were some great comments there from Dr. Beatty. When you talk about education here in the U.S., for over 100 years, we've really focused in on creating separate disciplines and really, focusing in on those areas. And that does a great job when it comes to creating new technologies and new solutions. But in terms of where education goes in the future and dealing with the rapid change that comes with that new technology, I think part of what we need the education to do is to provide a greater base for people. We can train them on how to use a particular software or a particular tool, and those are great things for the moment. But we have to tool our educational system up to a lifelong kind of environment where they're not stopping education. They're connecting in a variety of different ways. Dr. Beatty talked about access to education through different ways. We need to have our citizenry from K-12 all the way through senior citizen engaging in the educational process so that they're consistently and constantly retooling, because we don't know what the jobs are going to be in the future. We know, all we really know at this point is that there's going to be change. So we have to give them those good learning tools, good education. And from my perspective, coming from Truman State, obviously I see that benefit of a humanities baseline that helps you understand where values are, what ethics are, and helps you measure and evaluate where you want to go. So I see education playing a significant role in how the state of Missouri, addresses this change and becomes a stronger economy, a more adaptive and productive state.
Did say an operative word I'm going to return to shortly here in a minute, but I want to start with, I just got two questions. I guess they go together. What are the jobs of the future for Missourians, and what skills are they going to need? And I'll start with Brian on that.
Yeah, we're really at a very good position, globally and in the U.S. with the types of industry clusters that we have in Missouri. We have a strong IT cluster with technology. We have a strong manufacturing footprint. We're, one of the logistics transportation hubs in the nation, really in the continent, is what, my boss, Dan Meehan, the president, says. We really, we have a very good fixture in the continent for this. And it's also biolife sciences, as Dr. Beatty had mentioned. We have the plant life sciences, and we also have the human sciences. And all those combined bring us a lot of good job opportunities in the future for youth to take advantage of, and those that are, out of work or underskilled right now. When you think about some of the key jobs, computer programming, software, no longer do you need a 4-year degree to get into computer science and coding. You can do that with a bootstrap program. You can do it with a 2-year degree program, and you can start making anywhere of $50,000 all the way up to $80,000, depending on what your code language that you bring in is equipped to do, and how you can promote yourself and get into a company and actually work up in. So there's good positions. The biolife sciences, just recently, St. Louis added a fixture because of the COVID-19 vaccine, where they're going to start to, BioSTL is going to start to build out the same type of, infrastructure that they have for the plant sciences surrounding Danforth Plant Life Science Center, but it's going to be on vaccines. And so I think there's a lot of good opportunities in the state of Missouri. Steve and I, and Rob as well, we're really focused on manufacturing. That's coming back in many ways, but it's high skilled, it's high tech. You can get into a manufacturing career now, making upwards $18 an hour to start, sometimes 20. And if you work really hard in that field, go to a metropolitan community college, get a 2-year degree, move in through that corporate ladder, you could be making close to $80,000, $100,000 in the production. And then if you switch into the actual administration corporate side, it's untapped potential on what you can make. So there's great opportunities here, both at the entry level, the mid-skill level, and in the advanced professional. But one of the things, and I think we'll kind of get on this a little bit, which is we have to change the dynamic of what it means to go into a career pathway. You don't have to always focus on the 4-year degree program. You can go in entry points that are smaller, 6-month, 6-week, 2-year, whatever that is, to get into a really good career pathway. You don't always have to focus on it 4-year. Lord knows I wasn't, when I was a high school student, not even thinking that route. So I think those are some of the industries we have that are really key, IT, biolife science, transportation, and logistics, and manufacturing.
I'm going to let, that's a very important question about what jobs in the future for Missourians, what skills do workers need? So I'd like each of you to address that, and I'll turn back to Rob briefly here.
Yeah, one thing, and I think Brian really covered that well, but one very specific example is just the dynamic change that's happening within our industries in Missouri and within the sectors that have supported our state's economy for 100+ years. And one in particular that I would highlight that is, I think, at a really exciting moment overall is the automotive industry. And if you look at, General Motors has a large plant in Missouri. in Wentzville with thousands of workers there. We had an opportunity to help them invest $1.5 billion into that plant in Wentzville last year or so ago. Really just a significant reinvestment in that facility, which helps support the broader automotive industry in Missouri. 20,000 some odd jobs all across Missouri. They've been making vehicles with internal combustion engines, and all of a sudden, a company like General Motors makes a pledge that they're going to shift to electric vehicles, not in the far off distant future, but within 4 years, they're going to put 30 million electric vehicles into the market. And you can see what's happening in the automotive industry right now. And that is just one industry making one change that will have so many different implications for not just their companies, but for all of their suppliers. And certainly that will disrupt and change everything about the way that those products are made, and therefore change everything about the way that the work has to be done. So I think that kind of thing is going to be happening in just about every industry that's going to survive going forward, but certainly in those core sectors that supports our state's economy. And that's why I think the community colleges and others are going to have to really be, at the forefront like they have been, but we're all going to have to be moving a lot quicker than we were before, because the pace of this change is coming. I mean, literally EV, General Motors is shifting over in 4 years. And so how are we going to be ready for it? Those are the kind of things we need to be asking ourselves.
Dr. Beatty, my daughter is going to be a senior in high school, Francis Howell High here. So she's about to embark on a professional career. What would you tell her? Future of work in Missouri. What skills? What would you say to her? She's coming to MCC.
Good. Tell her to look me up. I'm a little hard to find. No, easy to find. One of the things Brian mentioned, the sciences. Healthcare just continues to explode. Everybody's kind of touched on. I was going to mention automotive, trucking, but the healthcare is another area. The coding is another good one. Cybersecurity, but healthcare, those cybersecurity software developers. In fact, I can't even find them to hire them because it is extremely competitive in those areas. When you're looking at hiring nursing faculty or any faculty in the health sciences, it's just extremely, the market is very, very tight. And the same goes for security, information security. So those are the areas that as much as we continue to train you, there's just so much of a gap and so much need there. And my friend Charlie Shields over at Truman Medical would say it's not just nursing. You're talking about all of the, OTA, sonography, it's those surgical tech. It's those fields, because a lot of people go right into nursing, but it's those other medical fields, practical medical fields that have a lot of need as well.
Well, coincidentally, I may have to send her for your way. She is actually going to go to Drury, but her goal is to be a neonatal surgeon.
Wonderful.
So you mentioned medical. You made her day. You made my day. So as long as I don't have to pay for it. But she gets to tease me and say, she always says, well, I'll be a real doctor. So I don't know what that means, but maybe it means employment. But Dr. Devlin. The good thing about making that transition from high school, I'm sure she'll be able to take advantage of some of those A+ dollars that many people forget about that are available by going and getting those short-term trainings, low cost, because you can use those A+ dollars. So just a little plug for one of the things that we have gotten right in our state. Perfect. And I'm going to come back and ask you all to do some plugs on some type of workforce development programs we've got. But Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing that I would add to that conversation in terms of, suggestions for your daughter, I think a lot of times we tend to focus on what happens after you graduate. Right? What happens after you graduate from high school, what happens after you graduate from a community college, or what happens after you graduate from a tech school, or even, what happens when you graduate from a college or a university. we look at what's that next day activity without really thinking about that next day activity isn't going to last your whole career. I mean, I doubt that anybody on this panel had in mind that they were going to be in these positions when we were in high school. So you need to go through your life and you need to educate yourself and you need to have experiences and try out different things. And especially those individuals that are going to be successful have to find what they're passionate about. And so I totally agree with what Brian's saying, that, not everyone needs a 4-year degree. There are different paths. And I agree with what Dr. Beatty's saying there in terms of taking advantage of all the different opportunities that you have and being smart about how you do that. Too many people throw significant investments into something without actually understanding whether that's the right thing for them to invest in. So there are lots of opportunities. Rob was in the military. I was in the military. If I'd have gone straight to school out of high school, I wouldn't be here today, because I'm sure I would have bombed out. It took the military experience to give me the discipline to be actually good in education. So that'd be my suggestion would be to go at it with a longer vision, but understanding that there are multiple tools that are out there, multiple paths that you can take and be successful. Regardless, you don't have to follow one path. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm going to try to bring us back a little bit with a humanities theme here, and ask you all how are approaches to workplace leadership and ethics evolving in the wake of everything. I'll start with Brian again.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, for the hard one. You could have went to Rob on that one. For workplace ethics, I think we're seeing just a transformation with what's occurring in the workspace with this. More and more companies are understanding that they need to be responsive to a variety of different issues at work. They need to be looking at what they do externally and internally. There was a big push for inclusion and diversity a couple of years back, but now we're seeing that companies that embrace that are thriving, and companies that did not embrace that are struggling. And we're having that issue right now play out in real life with some of the situations around the country. But when it comes to artificial intelligence and ethics, I think we're at a cusp of waging that debate across every industry. And you can look to companies. In fact, there was just a report that came out, I think in Forbes or something just recently, that said there's 8 artificial intelligence companies in the world, 5 of which that are located here in the United States, mostly in Palo Alto, Seattle area. And they're trying to wrestle with this impact of what artificial intelligence is and how does that integrate with us. So as we build these wonderful devices and wonderful, artificial intelligence systems, how do we keep the basic ethical underpinnings of our society integrated into that artificial intelligence model? And, you can look all across the internet for different debate, issues to be made. But the reality is, I think most, I would say the majority of folks that are working in that artificial intelligence world, especially on the leadership side, understand that they're at the cusp of something very transformational, and that if they don't get it right now, it's going to impact 50 years, 100 years down the line. And I think there is a lot of good work that's being done on that. So, from my perspective, the humanities plays an integrated role to that. And if you pick up any leader on the forefront of any type of technology industry, so it could be Microsoft, it could be Apple. What did they usually bring into their research, their discussions, in their team development? It's all about the person, the philosophy, and the culture, the human element of life. And I think that's one of the key things that we're learning as we go, is that the humanities plays a crucial role. Your daughter's going off into work in the medical field. I would imagine that she had some instrument, art, or background that has empowered her, but has also imparted on her this ability to be human in the work approaches that she'll have later on down the life. I myself is a history major. My wife is a history major. Our two boys are history majors. We believe in the humanities. I don't play an instrument. I wish I could, but all thumbs here. So, but I think on the corporate side, we're seeing a lot of good debate, discussion going forward on artificial intelligence and specifically how ethics plays a role in that.
That was one of the questions that I'm getting in here. I kind of want to start steering towards that. But let's go ahead and keep with that humanities, leadership, ethics. Is there any other aspect of the humanities that you all feel this is a reason why we should be looking at workforce development, the future of work? Steve, you want to add?
I think Brian hit a lot of good things there. From my perspective, when you talk about leadership and ethics, if anything, with all the different changes that we're seeing in the world, it puts more of a focus on what it takes to be a leader in the workplace. You have to have a much better understanding of how that human factor and how to integrate teams to try to maximize what you're doing within your company. The days of having set piece kinds of structures, those are going by the wayside. I mean, look at how many businesses are out there, organizations are out there that do the same operation day in and day out. So you have to have that flexibility. And in order to have that flexibility, you have to have the ethical base that allows you to deal with the folks that work with you. Building collaborative relationships to be more productive, being able to take different perspectives. That is one of the key elements in terms of an organization being successful, because if you have those different perspectives in inclusivity or however you want to approach that conversation, it puts your organization in a position where you have the flexibility and the agility to deal with the rapid change. So,
yeah. Dr. Beatty, how would you feel about the humanities role with this future of work? Just not leadership or ethics, maybe something broader.
Yeah, I think it's a little broader. I think about design thinking and the critical thinking that is associated. When you look at we were talking as a team and on a national level about all of these dollars that are coming in. And boy, oh boy, you better be able to spend it, because this is a once in a lifetime thing. Well, what that takes is, I asked my team, what's our moonshot? What's our moonshot? How do we think outside of the box, partnering either with the state or local communities to leverage this opportunity so that we can, and that takes I think the transferable skills, you and I, we already had that connection of coming out of the same frame of thinking, but it takes some design thinking, it takes some thinking outside of where you sit right now and really thinking about that moonshot. So I think that as we train the future workforce, where humanities becomes important, a good nexus is the design thinking that is required sometimes to take those fields to the next level.
Oh, fantastic. And that's the reason why we hold this this type of theme with humanities. It's just not a bunch of eggheads in an ivory tower, PhDs in history, literature, all of that. There is a real life connection with the larger world of STEM. And so we need to show that. I'm going to turn to Director Dixon. I hear you often refer to economic development as a team sport. Can you talk about what goes into creating jobs and how the department plays a role in growing our economy? And you got to use sports terminology.
That's right. So if I could just add one thing to the previous question,
Sure.
And I'm sorry to backtrack a second.
That's okay.
But one thing that we've been wrestling with, not just within our department, but all of the state agencies as organizational leaders in our own right, is mental health within our workforce and within our own employees. And The pandemic, I think, has put just incredible strain on society, on our public health, on the economy, but also on people individually, and that bears out in their personal as well as their professional lives. And so I think if there's anything that we as leaders of organizations, but also the folks that are members of the Humanities Council can help with, it's a workplace issue, it's a work-life issue, but it's something that will certainly, I think, linger as a result of the pandemic that we need to think about. So I didn't want to get off
I'm glad
that previous topic. Yeah.
Anytime you can build the humanities, I'm all for it. So.
There you go. But you know, to the question about economic development being a team sport, you know, that's how we approach it. And we, as a part of our reorganization a couple of years ago, we literally restructured our organization from being kind of based around the Truman Building across the street from the Capitol in Jefferson City to being based around the regions and the communities that our department is here to serve. And so I will spare you a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, but my very strong belief is that economic development works best when local communities tell the state and tell the federal government what they would like to accomplish and get done, and ask for our support rather than being the guy from Jeff City or Washington, D.C. that shows up and says, here's how I can help. So what we would really like to see, and when we say team sport, it's the community colleges, it's the universities, it's the private sector certainly, but it's our transportation agencies, it's our local workforce teams, it's you know, all of the above that are really working together to try to not just in the moment win the deal, so to speak, when you've got an opportunity in front of you, but the real work of getting your community ready to go so that you do have those opportunities come and knock on the front end. So that means doing the blocking and tackling, you know, well in advance of getting things like your sites need to be ready. Do you have development sites that a company wants to look at in the first place? Do you have a community college that has the right training programs and the right equipment to train people on? Do you have a business environment that is going to be in a place where a business can thrive, instead of having a city that has development policies that are slow and outdated? And so all of those kind of things have to happen in advance. And it's not just the state Department of Economic Development or the local economic development team, but literally an entire partnership coming together, both public and private, to take advantage of those opportunities. And if I can add just one more cliche to this, you know, we always say that a prepared community wins. And if your community is not ready, you're never going to be able to even have the opportunity to win in the first place. And so that team sport concept comes in as much on the front end as it does when you've got that deal across the table, so to speak.
I want to turn to, we've got some great questions coming from the audience participants, and I'm trying to put these a little bit together so we can address them before 3:15 arrives rapidly. Some of the operative words I'm getting, how does, you know, remote work, how does it affect unemployment claims? What about justice-based approaches to the transition in our economy? One person mentions clean energy, the economy and workforce. But how will workers be protected and supported in an unprecedented economy that is essentially embracing isolation, remoteness in so many ways? Anybody want to touch that?
That was
Free
a
for all.
lot. That was
Yeah,
a
that
lot.
is. Yeah, I'm trying to combine these so we can get them all in. I'm one of
Yeah,
those folks.
give me the first piece. I think I was able to address the first piece.
What about remote work? How does it affect unemployment claims?
I don't know how it affects unemployment claims, but remote work was our normal for quite a while. And I will tell you, it's affected how people transition. I think it's become too normal. And now we're having to transition back into recognizing that the folks we serve don't always work in that environment. And so it's creating a major transition. Rob might be better to answer how it's impacted I'm gonna put him on the spot on how it's impacted unemployment claims.
Have at it, Rob.
I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, obviously our state has seen an incredible increase in unemployment claims as every state has, and our State Department of Labor has been, trying to address that significant need. They've literally put more than $5 billion of unemployment claims into the state's economy and into, laid off workers, wallets because, for those benefits. But I don't know the answer to, how does remote work factor into that? Would have to plug into our Department of Labor to answer that more specifically.
Brian, Steve, you want to address it quickly?
So I'm not sure about the unemployment conversation, but in terms of the conversation around community outreach and protecting the workers in that conversation, part of that, from my perspective, is we need to look at the concept of remote work not as an either or. We need to look at that as another means of communication. I mean, with all the negative aspects associated with the pandemic and having to go into lockdown and everything, we learned some new ways to interact. And I've been in some situations where we've actually had greater participation because we are working on remote or utilizing virtual platforms. So part of the conversation from my perspective is we still need to have community engagement. There still needs to be interaction with the community. And some of that's in person, some of that's in large group settings, some of it's virtual. And if anything, we need more interaction because of the change that's going on in our world. I mean, if all we do, the concept of being in isolation, if we say, well, we're going to everybody being remote work and we're all going to be isolated. Okay. If we let them isolate themselves, if we let ourselves be isolated, then that will happen. But part of the conversation from my perspective, and this is where, Humanities again jumps into this conversation. It's how do we build a neighborhood? How do we build a community? Well, sometimes a community is just next door, open your door and walk out in your yard. Sometimes a community can be, a city or a town. Sometimes a community can be a professional network, and you can have greater, we've now learned, we've got grandparents that are communicating with their grandchildren more often now than in many cases they used to, because they have the opportunity to get online and use these tools. So I think from my perspective, it's a societal question that we need to use the tools to our advantage. Don't let the tools force us into a path. So,
yeah, Brian, that's a very good question. You guys can see the questions, I believe, and I'm looking at the longest one there. So if you want to address any of those parts there, please do, because it's a great question.
Let's turn this question just slightly. I agree with everything that's been said. But here's one of the biggest issues this comes down to, which is infrastructure. We need an infrastructure that allows access to everybody in the state of Missouri with high-speed broadband capabilities. It doesn't just benefit the individual, it benefits the employers, and it certainly benefits the humanities. And we've seen it play out during COVID. If you think about this in many, many ways, during COVID, a lot of the museums, art institutes actually did virtual exhibits where you could take your student, your family into the Guggenheim, clear across the world, and do tours through these art. You could go to St. Louis, the St. Louis Art Museum, all these different things brought to your home. The other piece to this on the humanities side is if there's cultural events, activities, festivals going on in Cassville, Missouri, or Chillicothe, Missouri, how do they promote that if they don't have the broadband capacity? And how does something like as little as an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast in the middle of Kirksville or Palmyra, Missouri, get online and actually promote the fact that they have that type of that hosting there? So it's an infrastructure. And I want to throw it over to Rob because he has brought on Tim Arbeiter, who comes from the chamber world, to actually lead this initiative to try and figure out how Missouri can strengthen the infrastructure that will then enrich our lives.
Let's get to some of these programs. There was a question about plan going forward, chamber, DED, doing to promote economic growth. What's Missouri 2030?
Well, Missouri 2030 is a strategic initiative that we launched in 2015, Steve. And, it's something that the chamber and really with, input from, the higher education community, the business community, and really all of, across the state of Missouri, different stakeholders. But we sat at a meeting in 2013, 2014, where we were listening to other states talk about their economic development efforts. And it came very clear that Missouri needed a statewide strategic plan for the business community. So we embarked on Missouri 2030. We contracted with the Gallup organization. They did qualitative, in-depth interviews with about 1,000 CEOs around the state of Missouri. And they came up with some key findings. One, workforce and talent development is the priority for many businesses. In fact, 97% of the employers that responded to our survey said that talent development is the top priority. If we don't get that right, we're not going to be prosperous going forward. The other issue is competing for jobs, and that's new business startup, the entrepreneur community that we have in the state of Missouri, and also some regulatory issues that are surrounding that. Infrastructure. And that's broadband, that's transportation, bridges, roadways, key issue. If you don't have the right infrastructure in place, people aren't going to be able to come into your state. If you don't have the right energy structure in place, you're not going to have the lights on. And then the other thing was uniting the business community. What we saw in 2015 was businesses were kind of being pulled in different directions, and there's a lot of different competing agendas out there. And we worked very strategically to put our Missouri 2030 agenda at the forefront of the table and said, this is not going to be a static document that goes to the wayside, that this is a living, breathing document that we're going to take input from our business community and revitalize what we need to do as time goes on. And we worked directly with Rob Dixon and others to, refine what Missouri 2030 is. But basically, it's a statewide strategic plan for Missouri's business communities to really unite and strengthen where we are in the state and where we are in the nation, because we want to be the state that competes for the jobs, for the entrepreneurship activity. You had Kauffman Foundation, which is a wonderful asset in our state earlier. They understand what it takes to grow entrepreneurship activity. We don't need to recreate the wheel with a new program. We just need to look to Kauffman to figure some things out. Steve's group with SBTDC network that's statewide. If I have an idea to start a pizza shop, I can go to Steve's group and get some training, figure that out. I don't plan to do that, but if I wanted to do that, the SBTDC network. So it's unifying all these different partners in the state to go forward to really raise the level of prosperity in the state of Missouri.
And I do want to turn quickly, if we can just do this briefly here, because we do have some time. And this is for Director Dixon here. Two initiatives, one Best in Midwest and the other one Missouri One Star. Can you briefly explain those two programs?
Absolutely. So much like the Chamber's revelation 10 years ago in 2015, I can't do math today, however long ago that was, back in 2015, much like that revelation that the business community had, the economic development community in our state also had a very similar kind of moment of reckoning, if you will, where we stepped back and we took a look around us and we realized that for all the activity and the things that we had been doing, many of our competitor states had been moving ahead of us. And so you look at some of our neighbor states, they'd seen much faster GDP growth, much faster job growth, seen more capital investment, more job creation. You can kind of go on down the list and look at a lot of those macroeconomic factors that unfortunately Missouri had spent a decade basically falling behind many of our competitors. And so Best in Midwest was really we called timeout and we hit stop, whatever metaphor you want to use there. And we said we're going to take a different look at this. And so Best in Midwest is our aspiration to become the best economic development state in the Midwest, kind of Minnesota to Arkansas, the Kansas all the way over to Indiana and Ohio, kind of that broader set there. And the thing that really strikes me when I think about that is there's really nothing special about those other states around us that isn't also special about Missouri. Very similar economies, very similar workforce sizes, very similar industry mixes in this Midwest set. And unfortunately, we were just kind of at the fair to Midland range, if not towards the bottom of the list. So Best of Midwest, Governor Parson asked us to take a look at really everything from how we approach economic development as an agency to the programs and to the kind of the overall strategy that we're following. And we took what we were doing and stopped doing it, and we started a new approach, went through a very large reorganization of my agency, went from being the largest economic development agency in the Midwest. The next closest one behind us had 500 fewer employees than we did. We're now one of the smallest ones, and that's by design. We have about 125 employees, and we really have one or two very core things that we do, and that's economic development, so trying to help businesses come here or expand here. We do community development with our work with nonprofit organizations and community infrastructure development, tourism, and workforce. And so those are the really core missions that we have now. So we've seen significant improvements in many categories. I can't take credit as an economic development agency for all of them, but I'm very proud of the work that is happening across the entire administration in many ways. So you mentioned Missouri One Start, and that was one of the key features of the governor's overall workforce and infrastructure overhaul from just a couple of years ago. And the community colleges are a very key partner in this with us. But basically what Missouri One Start is it provides customized job training and employee recruitment services for businesses that are hiring right now. And so the way that our agency approaches workforce training and recruitment is that our job is to help those businesses fill the jobs that are open today. Higher education, our DESE partners in K-12, our workforce development colleagues, they're worried about kind of the long haul and helping an individual person kind of figure out what they want to do when they grow up, for lack of a better way to put it. Our job is to get from that moment when the company says we're going to expand in Missouri and we're going to open that new factory in 18 months. Our job is to help them get those jobs filled and trained and recruited right now. So Missouri One Start is really designed to be competitive with some of the best in the country. We looked extensively at what was happening in the southeast part of the United States, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. Many of those states are renowned for their workforce development and the way that they've connected workforce and economic development. So we stole a lot of their good ideas and I think are getting a lot better at it than they were. And Missouri One Start, we're really proud of the work that they're doing. Would encourage anybody to take a look at that. It's a agency within DED, but it's really, I think, one of the cutting edge workforce development efforts around the state. MCC is a key leader in that regard as we do customized training around Missouri. So we're really proud of the work. Best of Midwest, it's an aspiration. We're still moving in the right. We're still moving in the directions that we need to go. Got a lot of room to keep going. But as I mentioned, Missouri has moving ahead leaps and bounds relative to other states after the pandemic. We've got a lot of great opportunities in front of us right now, and there's absolutely no reason why other states in the Midwest should be outperforming us, not with the resources and the workforce and the focus that we have.
I want to ask Dr. Beatty here something, because I remember from her bio and all that, and it's just built on just what Rob was talking, and definitely Brian and Steve, I want your input on this because it's based on a question that has been asked. It's kind of dear to my heart. The question has come up several times today, and it's the rural-urban, I don't want to say divide, just the world. Dr. Beatty, I mean, you've hit from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast, and I'm going to throw in the Gulf Coast because you have Texas, and Houston's not that far from it. And now you're here in the great Midwest, here permanently to stay, I'm sure. But you're also in an urban area. So let's address that urban-rural. How's the workforce different for urban and rural? We've mentioned broadband, of course, but let's investigate that in other ways and take the urban form.
Well, one of the things I did when I was at Houston Community College, we created these 9 centers of excellence. And we have those here, we call them institutes. I premise with that because I think when you look at a programs in a collective that have program adjacency, that it's not necessarily an urban versus rural. I'd like to break that myth. For example, agriculture tends to be more of a rural associated program, whereas you've got not only agriculture, you've got veterinary, the vet tech training side, which we have, you've got urban agriculture, you've got all of the science that goes into agriculture. That is a field that I think in the mindset of people in a certain region could be associated with a rural, more of a rural setting. And that, and you know, that's not just here. When you go to California, I spent a lot of time in California. You go up to Bakersfield, you go up to Fresno, those are ag heavy areas. And when you come down into Orange County, you're not going to see an ag program. I'd like to see how that has changed. I left Southern California a long time ago, but that's a field, that's an example. I do think there is a thought process that creates a divide between the urban and rural or even suburban. And I think we see it just in our name, unfortunately. I think people with the name Metropolitan Community College, that if you are in a more rural area, that you might not consider us your college because they say, oh, that's for the metropolitan, that's for the city folks. And so there's an automatic attachment there. So that rural versus urban divide is real in a number of different ways, programmatically, perspective in terms of how a college is viewed based upon its placement. There's a lot of real assets, and they already talked about the digital divide, which had a bright spotlight on it and goes across race and all kinds of socioeconomics based upon where you live as to whether or not you had access to education. And you started this in my bio by talking about access, and equitable access is one of the things that I champion. And you know, John Maxwell has a chapter, I think it's the 21 Laws of Leadership. Yeah. And he says it's the law of the lid. And that many people put a lid, you know, we talk about it internally about how do we put a lid on ourselves to prevent us from growing or prevent us from thinking differently. And I think in some communities, there's a lid, or there's an automatic perspective lid that's placed on whether you're in a metropolitan area or a urban area, or a lid that is associated with a rural area, that puts a cap on what is possible rather than what is reality.
Okay, we got to break that. I just got buzzed by my boss, my deputy director. I wasn't even paying attention at the time. We're getting close. So if you want to continue on that rural urban, and I'll just add this first, that, you know, the National Endowment for Humanities, Missouri Humanities, one of our most prominent priorities and focus is on what we call underserved or underrepresented populations. And what we forget is much of that, we always focus so much on like inner city, urban cores, things of that nature, but rural is part of that. And the NEH, I'm very proud that has noticed that, so that rural communities are crucial in this as well. And even though we have two major cities and a population mostly just over 50% there, we are a rural state heavily, especially with our business and all. But what I wanted to do is just one last thought, because time is flies. We're supposed to stop at 3:15. We go over a little bit. I think Ashley will just have to deal with it. But I want to get towards our 4 o'clock. But how about just each one of you, one final thought. And I'll start with Steve. He hasn't talked in a while because I kept closing him off. But we have one final thought for a future of work, anything.
Man, now you caught me off guard there because I was thinking about the rural versus urban conversation.
Okay, then do that. How's that? That's your one final thought.
So I guess in continuing on the conversation of rural urban divide, from my perspective, I think part of that is the way that we think about different things. We like to create distinct points and saying, well, here's the urban area, here's the rural area. I mean, in the time that I've been involved in education, I think I've seen the definitions for what is urban versus what is rural change. And there's so many different definitions out there. I think what we need to be looking at is what's the state system look like? And when we meet with companies or meet with communities, to talk about workforce issues or manufacturing issues, we suggest to them to consider where do they fit in the system, in the bigger statewide system. You know, don't think of yourself as an island and you have to create your own ecosystem. Figure out how you plug into something else. So, you know, if you're 40 miles down the road from St. Louis or Kansas City, are you necessarily going to be another manufacturing center? Maybe not. Maybe you're a bedroom community, and there's what does it mean to be a bedroom community and have people travel? And the other thing I'm going to throw in there is, when I was a kid, driving 30 miles was a long way. Now people are willing to travel, you know, an hour to 2 hours to get to a job and don't even think about that. So I think the definition of rural versus urban is changing. It's more of a lifestyle kind of question. Where do you want to live and what kinds of amenities do you want to have? And that's okay. But we need to work on the infrastructure, like Brian was saying, to help support people to live where they want to.
That's Brian. One final thought.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, humanities in the development of the individual is probably the most crucial area that you can think about. You know, humanities imparts critical thinking, communication, research and analysis, and also innovation in entrepreneurial mindset, in the way that you come up with ideas and what have you in the disciplines of humanities. And that right there is what employers are seeking. You know, they don't want to be, you know, they don't want individuals that are trained how to think per se in a certain formula that's locked in. They want people to be able to critically think and challenge themselves and others that work on that team on a problem to come up with the right solution for that problem. And so critical thinking is in my opinion, is the bedrock of the humanities. It helps everything that you do, from music to fine arts and everything in between. So, you know, I would say that's the one thing that we can just continue to reinforce is the development of a critical mind in the way that you problem solve.
Well, I'm going to run out and get both my kids. So repeat that. I'm going to bring them in. They got to hear this. So I don't listen to Dad about that. Director Dixon, one final thought.
Yeah, there's a reason why Governor Parsons' top economic development priorities are workforce development and infrastructure. It's because those are the two most important pillars on which we can build our economy, not just for today, but for well into the future. And that would weather us and make us more resilient for any of the changes that we know we're going to face. And so I think as leaders in our organizations across the board, members of the Humanities Council, certainly business leaders across the state, if we continue to focus workforce development, infrastructure development, we're going to end up okay. And because those are the things that will really matter in the long run.
And I just want to put in a quick plug here before I close with Dr. Beatty, is that technically my boss, Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, is also adamant on the infrastructure, workforce development, all that. We've had many conversations, and that's the humanities can't help with that. So Dr. Beatty, how about one final thought?
I mentioned earlier how I think the transferable skill set from the humanities and the critical thinking is helpful. My own personal story, my son went for a 4-year liberal arts education, got a job in the behavioral health, and just switched to being an apprentice in an HVAC field. And when he told me, I was like, but wow, you're gonna make good money, and he'll have the business sense and the thinking that'll enhance and only enhance his trajectory. So I think that's a real life example about how the humanities, the liberal arts are an asset, regardless of whether you're in a career and technical field or if you remain in the arts. There is a place for the humanities.
Well, thank you. That's just great. That's exactly what this whole symposium is about. So on behalf of Missouri Humanities, thank you all. Thank all 4 of you. I do plan on taking you all out to lunch sometime soon. So look for a call from me. For the audience, thank you for joining. And if you have any questions for this distinguished panel, you can find their email addresses or email me, and I'll make sure I get you to the right place, because I'm sure there's a lot more questions to go. But thank you for joining this session. We appreciate everyone in the audience who's able to join. I got to invite everybody, come back at 4 p.m. and 7. We're not done. So please join us. This goes on. And again, thank you to my esteemed panelists. I appreciate it. So I owe you all one. So we'll take care. We'll see you soon.